Are you looking for that next great rock and roll book to dig into? I've got the top 5 best rock and roll books of 2026 so far for you. That's what we're looking at today, from a new angle on grunge, to a deeper look inside the Rolling Stones, to a defense of those AOR classic rock and roll radio years. I got a definitive story of The Clash, and one of the most personal eyewitness accounts from the 90s alternative scene. These books are massive, they're emotional, they're chaotic, and pure rock history. Welcome into the Rock Talk studio, where I look at rock and roll history and culture through all the new books, docs, stories, and products that matter. I'm your host, Big Rick, and this is how it's going to work today. Each book is going to get ranked, and each book will have to answer 4 questions. Is this book for you? What makes the book unique? What will you get from it? And then I'll wrap it up with my bottom line. Okay, let's kick this off with a book that is coming in at number 5, and that book is A Screaming Life, Into the Super Unknown with Soundgarden and Beyond. Kim Thayil's memoir, Kim Thayil, the lead guitarist of Soundgarden. This book is for you if you're into the grunge history, if you're into Seattle music culture, and a story behind a band that helped literally create an entire movement. It's also if you want more than your usual memoir of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That's not this type of memoir. This is a more thoughtful book. It's about identity, community, loyalty plays a big part here, and what it felt like to be inside Soundgarden before anyone knew how big grunge would ever become. And if you're a Soundgarden fan, this one matters because Kim Thayil is the only living member who saw every chapter of the band's story from beginning to end. So what makes this book unique? Other than that part, I think that's huge that Kim's the only one to be able to tell this type of story. But what makes this book unique is it gives you a view of grunge that doesn't start in Seattle. It actually starts somewhere else, Park Forest, Illinois, to be exact. I don't want to spoil too much, but the key figures connected to the Seattle scene, a lot of them came out of there, and you get a deeper story of Soundgarden's foundation. You start to see that grunge was not just a sound or a fashion moment. It came out of people, places, communities, outsiders, record stores, indie labels, and creative people who were really pushing against the mainstream. It's also unique because Thayil does not come across as a typical rock star. Like I said, this isn't a sex, drugs, and rock and roll memoir. He's a little more cerebral. He's kind of dry, funny, but guarded, loyal, and very protective of Soundgarden's identity. What you'll get from the book is you'll get a better understanding of Soundgarden's real place in rock history. This book shows that Soundgarden did not just become successful, though they did become hugely successful, but they helped make success possible for other bands that followed. And that really stood out in this book. Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, of course, and the larger grunge explosion all benefited from the road Soundgarden helped carve out. And emotionally, you get Thayil looking back on Chris Cornell, not in a sensationalized way, but a way that feels reflective, painful, and deeply human. My bottom line on this book is, this is not just a Soundgarden book. It's a book about how a band helped change what rock music could be. It gives you the history, of course, but it also gives you the context, where the band came from, what shaped them, what they were fighting to protect, and why their impact reached far beyond their own records and created this huge scene. If you want to understand grunge from a different angle, from the inside out, and you want to see Soundgarden as more than just one of these big Seattle bands, this is an important, one-of-a-kind view and a great way to start your reading list of the best rock and roll books of 2026 so far. Book number 4. Book number 4 was the biggest surprise of them all. It was kind of an oddball book, but once it got going, I really started getting into it. It's called Raised on Radio, Power Ballads, Cocaine, and Payola, the AOR Glory Years, 1976 through 1986. This book's written by Paul Reese. This book is for you if you grew up on or even secretly loved Journey, Foreigner, Boston, Heart, Styx, REO Speedwagon, Toto, Bryan Adams, Pat Benatar, all that huge FM radio sound from the late 70s into the mid 80s. It's also for you if you're interested in the moment when rock became massive, emotional, polished, and almost impossible to escape. And if you've ever wondered why this music was loved by millions but mocked by critics, This book gives you an inside story and a great look at it. What makes this one unique is it treats this AOR period like a serious part of rock history and not just like a guilty pleasure. The author Paul Reese tells a story through the voices of the people who were there, musicians, producers, managers, industry insiders. It's an oral history, and most of the bands that I mentioned contribute. So Steve Perry of Journey tells great stories. Tom Scholz of Boston's in this book. Kevin Cronin, REO Speedwagon, Pat Benatar, the girls from Heart, Ann and Nancy Wilson, Def Leppard, Foreigner, Mick Jones. I mean, everybody contributes to this, and it really shows what these bands were trying to do and how they were taking a sound that was so huge in the 70s and bringing a modern take on it. The book also captures the contradictions of the era, the huge choruses, the big money, cocaine, payola, power ballads, the ego, and the radio dominance. That was huge, and all that was happening at this time in rock history. What you'll get from it is you'll definitely get a better understanding of why AOR mattered. Critics, they heard this slick production and radio-friendly hooks, but fans heard something different, and it really became attached to a lot of memories of their life. You also get a reminder, and I like this part a lot, that this music was not lightweight in a lot of ways. These bands had serious players. Some big singers came out of this era, songwriters and producers. I mean, Tom Scholz changed the sound of rock guitar during this time. Steve Lukather from Toto was everywhere. And Steve Perry, I think, is the greatest voice in rock and roll. Hart and Wilson could be the greatest female voice in rock and roll. So a lot was happening. There were skilled artists making songs built to reach people. And you get to see how they were doing this with this book. And you get a better sense of where things started to go kind of sideways with this. Especially with the power ballad, the dreaded power ballad. Once everybody needed to have this big emotional anthem, the formula kind of became easier to mock. But the best of those songs really worked because they connected, and they still connect today. My bottom line with this book is Raised on Radio makes the case for this time period being one of the most successful. This is the time period that sold the most records, definitely misunderstood, and definitely endearing. And definitely an endearing era in rock and roll history. Was some of it overproduced? Obviously. Did some of it get really cheesy? Definitely. But to dismiss the whole era as soulless corporate rock really misses the point. And I like how the book showed that it was more than that. So if you want to understand why these songs never really went away and why maybe we should stop calling them guilty pleasures, this book is definitely worth your time. Book number 3 in the top 5 is the Rolling Stones biography by Bob Spitz. This book is for you if you're into big, sweeping 700-page versions of maybe, I'm going to scratch maybe, of the greatest rock and roll story about a band ever told. It's definitely for Stones fans, obviously, but it's also for anyone who loves the long-form mythology of rock, friendships, betrayal, creative explosions, and drugs is, Rolling Stones, money, danger, survival, and the strange miracle of this band that lasted for over 60 years and continues to play on. What makes this book unique is Bob Spitz, the author, centers the story around Mick and Keith, and I like that angle. Absolutely, Brian Jones and the other players get their due, but this early blues obsession, the formation of the band, and the two main players, Mick and Keith, form an interesting dynamic that gives this book a different take. Spitz does a great job at showing their friendship as creative, combustible, competitive, and almost really indestructible. They would fight, split apart emotionally, and drive each other crazy, but when they came together creatively, something usually seemed to always happen. And that was really interesting how wherever they might be, they always, once they came together, they were very creative. And this is what gives this version of the Stone story its weight. It's not just about the legend. It's about two people at the center of it who kept finding a way to be productive. What you'll get from this is you'll get a full sweep version of Rolling Stones as both outlaws and master strategists. You see the chaos, you see the darkness, the drugs, the damage, and the people who got pulled into their orbit and basically got spit out. But you also see the business instincts that this band had. And you get to see how they learn to sell danger and manage their image and keep the machine moving long after they became rich, famous, and established, and long after they lost members. My bottom line with this book is Bob Spitz is a great writer. He wrote great biographies of Led Zeppelin and the Beatles, so you're in really good hands with this one. It's just a really well-written book. If you want to go back and read those Beatles and Zeppelin biographies, I would strongly suggest them. Tremendous book. Is it long? Absolutely. But the Stones story earns this. They deserve this. This is not just a band biography. This is one of the greatest survival stories of all time in rock. And for me, when it comes to the greatest story in rock about a band, it's no contest. It's the Rolling Stones. And this book makes the case in a big, satisfying way. Check this out. Rolling Stones biography by Bob Spitz. Two more. Let's do number 2. Another book that is thick and full of amazing stories. And that is this book called Passion is a Fashion, The Real Story of the Clash by Pat Gilbert. It's a reissue celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Clash. This book came out about 10 years ago. It's for you if you're into punk history, if you're into British youth culture, and a band that felt like they were trying to do something more than just make records. The Clash were just not another punk band. They had a mission. They had politics. They had style, anger, ambition, and this belief that rock and roll could still matter as a force. So if you want to understand how a band could be, as Joe Strummer used to say, anti-fascist, anti-racist, and anti-ignorance, and still be messy and flawed and chaotic and explosive, this is the book for you. And also, if you want the big Clash story, this is not a cleaned up version in any way. And what makes this book unique is the depth. Without a doubt, Pat Gilbert conducted more than 70 interviews for this book and pulls from band members, insiders, managers, roadies, producers, friends, scene figures, and people who rarely speak about the Clash spoke to him and really helped fill this story out. Like I mentioned, it is a very deep book. It's a full layered view of the band, not just the band members, but also their managers and just the larger punk world around them. Bernie Rhodes, their manager, plays a huge part in this story and how much he was an architect of a lot of what the Clash did, and not always in a sympathetic way, but absolutely essential to their image, to their spirit, and to their sense of purpose. What you'll get from this book, you'll definitely get a better understanding of why the Clash were different. This book shows that contradiction that was going on behind their mission. The Clash could be brilliant, idealistic, political, and even visionary, but also very frustrating, very self-destructive, and really addicted to chaos. And you get the bigger world around this band and how it affected them and how it fueled them and the punk scene. And this book is not a breezy read. It's very detailed, it's dense, and it's packed. And sometimes it's a lot. But if you stick with it, it's a great book about the Clash that actually feels right. Their story was so noisy and layered and emotional and political and overloaded with meaning. There was so much going on, but Paul Gilbert did a great job with this. My bottom line is, Passion is a Fashion is the best book I've ever read about the Clash. It may not be the easiest starting point if you want a light introduction, but if you want the big story, the complicated story, the chaotic story, this one explains the mission, the music, and the mythology of the band. This is a book. I love this book. Passion is a Fashion about the Clash. Check this one out. Coming up next, I'll give you the best book to check out in 2026 so far. I read over 30 rock and roll books a year. Last year was my biggest year, over 30 rock and roll books. I love rock and roll books, so I wanted to put this list together for you. From all the books I read, these are definitely my top 5 so far, and this one really stood out. I really enjoyed this book. It's called Even the Good Girls Will Cry by Melissa Often-Maurer. This book is for you if you're into 90s alternative rock, if you're into Hole, Smashing Pumpkins, Courtney Love, Billy Corgan, and the whole mythology around the post-grunge moment. It's also if you want a memoir that goes deeper than the usual backstage chaos. Without a doubt, the big names are there. There is some drama there. The grief is there. But this book is really about what it felt like to live inside that world as a young woman, as an artist, and a musician trying to find her place. And if you want a firsthand account from someone who was not just watching the 90s alternative machine happen or caught up in it, but was actually inside it, this is the book. And what makes it unique is Melissa's perspective. She was close enough to the center of the storm. Remember, she was running with Courtney Love. She was running shotgun with Courtney Love. It takes a special person to be able to do that and deal with it. But she was also different enough from the people around her to kind of really see it in a different way and very clear. She joins Hole right after the death of Kurt Cobain and walks into a band led by Courtney at one of the most emotionally charged moments in rock and roll, and then later plays with Billy Corgan and the Smashing Pumpkins, the same person she met after apologizing for her friend throwing a beer bottle at him during a show. But what really separates this book is that Melissa doesn't tell it like a scandal memoir. She tells it like an artist. Her voice is very reflective, it's emotional, it's strange at times, but it's warm and sometimes even dreamlike. She's not just giving the gossip of what was going on. She is recovering a piece of the scene that was really distorted by a lot of the legend and giving an inside look that only she could capture. So what you'll get from this is you'll get a great eyewitness account of one of the last greatest scenes in rock and roll history. You get the inside view of Hole after Kurt's death and the pressure of stepping into that band, the experience of being connected to Courtney Love, and the strange emotional weight of playing music that was surrounded by so much grief and chaos and fame and expectation. But you also get a very different view of the 90s alternative world, not just from a front person and not just from a myth, but from someone who lived it, from a woman who played it, absorbed it, and survived it. And because Melissa comes from an eccentric artistic family, the book also has a deeper personal thread to it. She's not just writing about rock stardom, she's writing about identity and womanhood and art and memory and what it means to be shaped by a world that she didn't really fully choose. My bottom line with this book, Even the Good Girls Will Cry, is it's more than a memoir about Hole and the Smashing Pumpkins. It's really a record of this era, and it captures the beauty and the confusion and the grief and the danger and the spirit of the 90s alternative scene in a way that feels really honest and human. For me, this book adds an essential new perspective to a story that we thought we already knew. And because Melissa tells it with such warmth and intelligence and emotional depth, it's easily one of the best books in 2026. And it sits at my top as my favorite so far this year. Let's see at the end of the year when I do the top 5 for the year, if it makes it all the way to the end as the best book of 2026. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Love talking about the art form we know and love as rock and roll. I hope I gave you a few good tips for your next great book to check out. All right, let's tear it down, pack it up, and head on down the road. I'll see you next time in the Rock Talk Studio.